Corporation's campus grants. So, certainly we're going to say thank you to Target. I'd like to share a little bit about them. Target campus grants provide financial support to programs to develop and influence future Target leaders. The grants directly impact important areas such as academics, education, diversity and inclusion, leadership and development, and health and well-being, as well as volunteerism. Education is at the heart of Target's giving. It truly is. They were very generous with us bringing the speaker. We are pleased to have in attendance tonight two individuals from Target, Ali LaVista, who is an executive team leader and also a UConn alum, and Lauren Harrigan, who is the current Target campus liaison, who is still a student here and looking forward to a career in Target. And I would personally like to express appreciation to Renee Gardner, Field Campus Manager, for all her help with the grant application process. She was very helpful. So please join me in thanking Target. Now, I'd also like to introduce you to Jen Shirkani. And Jen is CEO of Penumbra Group and has spent over 20 years in learning and development as a learning and development specialist, trainer, and a speaker. Her topics are presented from a leadership perspective, filled with practical strategies and immediately usable tips. She lives in New Hampshire, where she oversees a national talent management firm, providing training programs, organizational development, consulting, and executive coaching. Jen Shirkani has been a featured speaker at several national and state conferences, as well as at dozens of organizations nationwide. Jen holds a master's degree in organizational leadership and focuses on leadership development, communication skills, and making common sense more common. Please welcome Jen Shirkani.
Good evening. Thanks for coming out. Can everyone hear me okay? We're going to adjust the mic a little bit, I think. Is that better? Can you all hear me?
Is it
Is
on?
that okay back there?
Let's see who's in the on position. Let's just double check it, Jen. Okay. Come on, what light on? There's a red light on there. Oh, sorry. I'll struggle here, but I'm not sure. Is it on?
Can you hear us?
Yeah. That was a minute ago. Lights on. Maybe.
On the side.
Yeah, we've got the side on the switch. Sorry, folks. That's one light position. My file, I know.
Well, sorry, you guys.
All right, I'll start and I'll see if we can fix it.
Okay, well, welcome. Thanks so much for coming this evening. I'm going to share with you some information about this concept called EQ, or emotional intelligence, and hopefully inspire you to look at this as you grow into graduation and then moving on, maybe grad school or working in business or really any profession. This is a competency. If you focus on it, that can really make a difference for you. And I'll start by sharing one of my own stories. Early on in my career, I had finished school and I was probably at my second job, and it was a startup environment, actually in Minnesota, Minneapolis, home of Target. And I was working at this startup, and we had a very casual atmosphere, as you can probably guess, and I was part of this training and development team. There were 4 of us. And we were all over the place. We had a national company that we worked for, so one of us was on the road almost every week. We were also providing training for manufacturing employees, call center employees, retail salespeople. So it was a very dynamic environment with a very small team to support it. So me and my peers and my boss were never really together that much. Very rarely did we have a staff meeting where we'd all sit down and face each other in a conference room. Most everything we did was either by text or email. And that was just how we did our business. So for about 2 years I worked there and got very familiar with this environment and I got hired at a very big Fortune 500 pharmaceutical company, okay? Stuffy, everything you'd picture, you know, everyone's in suits, the complete opposite environment of what I've just left. But I'm 20, whatever I was, 3 or 4, and I get hired into this big fancy company, and I go right to work, and I do exactly what I've always done, right? I'm a team 1 of 4, same kind of situation, and I do a lot of emailing and texting to my coworkers, and finally this one day, I'm in my cube, and I'm sending them notes, and they're all like I sense somebody standing kind of behind me, and I look over, and my entire department is standing there like this. And I'm like, what's going on? And they said, really? Do you need to keep emailing us? We're right here. We're right here around the corner. Like, what is wrong with you? And of course, I'm like, oh, sorry. You know, I hadn't even thought about it. Even then, I was thinking, so what's the big deal, right? I email a lot. So what? And it took me a while before I started to really understand why that was probably a problem or why they might have been upset with me. And it relates back to this quote by Daniel Goleman, who's a very well-known author on the topic of emotional intelligence, or EQ. And I see in the workplace every day today, and it doesn't seem to matter what gender, what age, what industry, what job title, this quote continues to play through. Your technical expertise will certainly help, but when it comes to integrating yourself into an organization or on a team, it's how you manage what you know, how you share what you know, how you integrate into the organization that will be the difference for you between success and any failure. Some of the smartest people I run into are getting let go because they can't work on a team. They can't lead other people. So it's a very valid area to focus on, as I said. Now, what it is, emotional intelligence or EQ, the way we define it, my firm specializes in applying this concept within particularly leadership. But the way we look at it is 3 things, 3 key elements to this. One is your ability to recognize yourself, recognizing your impulses, your drives, your motivations, knowing what your strengths and your weaknesses are, what your tendencies are. So it's high self-recognition. 2, it's your ability to read other people and situations accurately. It's what I call situational awareness. Something I was clearly lacking at my 3rd job because I was not paying attention at all to the differences in the environment or the culture or the people. The 3rd R is your ability to respond differently and adjust to the person or people or situation that you're in. The opposite of a one-size-fits-all approach. In my case, I didn't recognize, oh, this isn't an email environment. I need to get up and have face-to-face conversations with people instead of just operating in my little tunnel vision or comfort zone. This is what I know, this is what I do, this is how I do it, and then just expecting to pick up that behavior and put it into a different environment. Make sense? So it's recognizing, reading, and responding. Now, sometimes this is easier said than done, as you can imagine. Now, there's also a skill set that goes along with this, and I'm going to run through that in just a minute. But I want to talk for a quick minute, because there's a lot of conversations or questions about the differences between EQ and IQ. IQ is fixed. So all of you in the room who are of age, I'm guessing you're all 18, 19 years old or older, there you go. Your IQ is what it is, and longitudinal studies show if we retest you over the course of your lifetime, it's probably not going to change. EQ, on the other hand, can increase. Your ability to recognize, read, and respond can be developed, which is great news because, as I said, it's going to have a much higher likelihood or correlation with your job success than your IQ for most jobs. So that's wonderful. IQ is one dimension of intelligence, and we know now that there are several dimensions of intelligence. A lot of the work done by Daniel Goleman and his colleagues has now demonstrated EQ to be a bona fide behavioral science. Any of you here from the psych program? Some of you may be talking about this because we're starting to see this emerge now in psych programs as one of the many forms of intelligence that we see. But it's a very applicable intelligence, which is what's great about it. It's something you can develop and grow, as I said. And here's the best news about it, especially for all of you here. The earlier in life that you start to work on these skills, the better. Because I do a lot of executive coaching, and I end up working with people who are in the workplace and are in their 40s or 50s. And having to coach them on managing their impulses, on reading their environment, on not saying what they shouldn't say, becomes a much more difficult project than someone who started to work on these skills younger in life. So the sooner, the better for you. So there's some statistics out now about EQ, and I'd like you to guess for me, looking at income and degrees of emotional intelligence, take a guess how much more a year someone with high EQ makes versus someone with low EQ. Just yell out a couple of numbers, you think. How many more a year? 20.
30.
30. 50. Anyone think less than 20?
10.
10?
17.
I feel like I'm on The Price is Right. It is actually 29,000 on average more a year. Not a small number, right? That's a new Volkswagen. So it's tied directly to income. Now, where I see people make more money when they have better degrees of ability to recognize, read, and respond is they stay at one job longer, typically, because they choose their careers and jobs more wisely. So because they're there longer, they usually get promoted, have raises, etc., instead of starting over at a new company every couple of years. Sometimes if they're in sales, they make more commission. If they're in leadership, they have employees that are more loyal, which means turnover goes down, which means profits go up. And if they participate in any kind of a profit sharing or bonus program, they usually make more money that way. So there's several ways that you can get this extra 29,000 for fairly low effort when you think about it. These aren't skills that are necessarily hard to gain. They just require mindful attention. Now, the other research study that has come out that I thought was also very interesting, this came out of Daniel Goleman's work, is he looked at leaders across organizations, but he also looked at general population employees. And you can see here, he gave them IQ tests and did technical skills assessments and EQ tests. And when he looked at the ratio of the three, EQ continued to be or proved to be twice as important as technical skills and IQ at jobs at all levels. This is a difference maker in most companies because a new employee coming in or an employee who stays, who has that ability to manage themselves well, communicates well with others, deals with change without shutting down, can be motivated even when things get tough. Those are all traits every employer is looking for. Because then you are an employee, as we call it, that is low maintenance. You know what that means? Versus a high maintenance employee who's in trouble all the time, who's a lot of work for a manager. That's an employee that usually is on the short list. So here are the 10 key EQ skills. If you want to raise your competency in EQ, these are some skills to start focusing on. And I'll kind of run through these, define them for you so you know what they look like. And I'm also happy to take questions if you have them as we go. Okay, so self-awareness is the first R in the definition. This is your ability to recognize yourself. This is knowing if you're a morning person or a night person. This is knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. Now, people with higher degrees of self-awareness typically pick careers and jobs that are a better fit for them. Because they know their temperaments, they know what brings out the best in them, and they can pick environments and cultures and organizations that give them that opportunity.
We have a microphone. With that.
Maybe it was the red light versus the green light.
That must have been it.
Thank you. Better? Now I have to stop shouting so I don't blow you out. There are two elements to self-awareness. There is emotional self-awareness. This is your ability to know your moods. If you're upset, knowing first that you are upset, and two, why you're upset, and then how you're able to communicate that to other people. Emotional expression is a component of this self-awareness piece. And then there is social self-awareness. This is how connected you are to how you think you are or intend to be, and how everyone else around you sees you. Right after my little incident with my coworkers, I went through a tool called a 360-degree feedback survey. And in a 360-degree feedback survey, you take this survey online about yourself, and it asks you to answer these questions. Is this true or false about you, basically? And then your boss takes it, and your peers take it, and if you have direct reports, they take it, and you may have other people throughout the organization that take it. And when I got my feedback, I was pretty surprised. I wasn't quite as fantastic as I had convinced myself I was. And as I started to kind of piece together all these things that had happened, I started to understand why my coworkers saw me as a bit out of touch or a bit set in my own way of working and missing a lot of the landscape around me. So that's an element of social self-awareness. And that's something that takes a little time to sort out, but it can be done. And of course, I luckily learned this in my 20s, which really helped me tremendously, instead of waiting, as I said, until my 40s to take my first 360. The second element of EQ, which ties to the third R in the definition, is self-control. Managing your impulses to not say or do inappropriate things, even when you really, really want to. So responding and managing your behavior appropriately is a key element of emotional intelligence. Now, what is working a bit against us, and for your generation in particular, is we're seeing self-control rates go down, and they have been on a downward trend for the last 2 generations. Gen Y millennials and the current generation. Any guess why? Social media is one element. Why else? How is social media contributing to this?
24/7 communication?
Yeah, so you've got 24, instantaneous, right? Our patience level goes down dramatically when we have to wait for anything these days. We don't even want to wait to go home to look something up on the computer. We're like, I get out our phone and look at it up there. So we have instantaneous gratification. And what else?
We're always being told to express ourselves.
Yes, you've been growing up told it's okay to say anything you want. You're wonderful. And even in the workplace, employers are now asking a lot more feedback from employees than they ever used to, and they are weighing that employee input very differently than in years past. So even the workplace is becoming more tolerant of this expressing yourself. But there's always a limit to that, and it's really important that you're monitoring the filtering system and you don't just say something that comes to mind. So those two are very foundational. If you do nothing else after tonight, increase your self-awareness and your self-control, and your EQ will go up almost immediately. Those are two things that you can do immediately to change and improve and be focused on, because that's a continual effort that you'll have to make no matter what job you end up in, no matter how old you are. It's an ongoing work, something I still have to deal with and work on every single day is self-awareness, self-control, self-awareness, self-control. Now I'm going to give you a moment because I'd like to have you discuss with each other, just do a pair and share, or a group of you if you came together, what you think the implications might be when you're a new employee but you have low self-awareness. What could potentially happen? What could potentially go wrong? So just discuss that in your individual small groups, and then I want to hear a couple of ideas that you had. Okay. It'll be a short discussion. But you drifted more. Okay, let's hear a couple of examples. Let's hear from somebody over here. What do you think? Implications? Yep.
I thought you could hurt someone's feelings.
You could hurt someone's feelings because there's no filter, right? You just say it when you think it. Exactly. What else can go wrong? Yes?
You said that you're preventing growth
How?
within like your abilities, like your job. You're not really, you're bringing like your old techniques to Another
Ah.
new company in this position that you have.
Excellent. Here's a really key piece that you need to think about. You guys get an A+ over there. Self-awareness is tied to coachability. Because if you think about it, if I have high self-awareness, I know I'm not good at certain things. I know I might be struggling. And when my boss comes to me and says, look, you really need to kind of work on this, I'm like, okay, you're right, I do. Right? I'm open to the feedback and I can take it and I can use it and I can do something with it. When my self-awareness is low or my social self-awareness is off and my boss says, hey, you've got to really work on this, I'm like, I don't have to work on anything. Thanks very much, but I'm just fine. You don't know what you're talking about, or you didn't train me on that, so that's not my job, that's not my responsibility. And so I see a lot of new employees that can kind of point the fingers right back at the company, hey, it's your fault I'm not doing this right, instead of owning it and doing something with that feedback. So coachability is going to be a key competency, and it's tied directly to self-awareness and self-control. Excellent point, and it limits you completely, because if you don't think you need to grow, you don't. All right, one more. Implication of low self-awareness, self-control, low EQ as a new employee. We have another one? Yes? You could alienate your team. Yes. If you're a manager, yep. Because what happens if you have low self-awareness as a manager or leader? You don't take responsibility. You don't use them to their full potential. You point the fingers right back at them, right? And then what can happen is you lose your credibility as a leader because they see you making the mistakes that you point out in them. And then they're like, you're a buffoon, right? I'm not going to work for you. You don't know what you're talking about. Exactly. So again, it really doesn't matter what job, what role, or even what industry. These are two very foundational skills that usually determine success or failure, sometimes very early on in a job. Coachability alone is going to start to send a signal to the company whether you're able to roll with things or not. Okay? Thank you. Next skill, social skill. This is your ability to network, to get out and meet new people, your comfort in being with strangers that you maybe have never met but still be able to mingle or make small talk, how well you might integrate on a team and sort of divvy up either work together or sharing credit, sharing failures, how you might communicate interpersonally with different members of your organization from all the way to the top to all the way to the bottom. That's all social skill. And of course today with social media, talking about social media in the business world, LinkedIn is really it. So if you don't have a LinkedIn profile yet, that would be something I would highly recommend you get going on and have that ready to go, because networking on LinkedIn is a direct supporting tool to increasing your social skill. And it's probably the #1 job tool still used today, more than posting jobs on Monster and some of the other job boards. So networking's still it. And you know, networking face to face. You can't only network socially, social media wise, technology wise. Okay, so motivation is your ability to, your drive to achieve. And it's also your ability to pursue goals with energy and persistence, even despite setbacks. Now, just getting through college requires a heck of a lot of motivation because there are a lot of days where it's just easier to not go. And I've been there. I worked full time when I was in my undergrad, and it took me a long time to finish. And there were plenty of days I thought, I don't think I can do this, one more day. And so, you know, that's great training, that's great motivation support, because it encourages you to stick with something even when it gets tough. Next up is empathy. This is the third R in our definition. This is your ability to read people accurately. This is your ability to plug into someone else, to understand them, to recognize their emotions or how they're responding to you. So it's not just empathy, like I feel your pain, how we normally think of empathy. In the context of emotional intelligence, it's making an emotional connection to others. And in the workplace, especially as a leader or a manager, this is a very vital skill. This is showing up as one key element in something called employee engagement. How engaged an employee is directly correlated with how they feel their manager cares about them. Does the manager look out for them or kind of leave them on their own to figure it out and fend for themselves? So empathy can help in a variety of ways, and it also helps you with your ability to adjust or respond differently, because you might work with people, you might have one person who's very direct, and they just call it like they see it, and there's not a lot of filtering there, and they just say it, right? And you might have another coworker who's very conservative and soft-spoken and very gentle and doesn't say it even when they really want to. And the burden is really on you to adjust to each one of those styles instead of saying, well, this is me and my style, right? You kind of need to work with this. And so that empathy is what tells me who's the direct person and who's the gentle or amiable person, so I can adjust my communication with each of them to be most appropriate, and we can have a much more effective communication together. Stress tolerance. This is a biggie. This is something that will be very important that each person has to sort of be responsible for on their own. Different environments, depending on where you decide to go work, can certainly be more stressful than others. Part of self-awareness, though, is knowing how much stress can I tolerate? How much of a stressful environment can I take without cracking? And the cost almost always when stress tolerance goes down is your self-control. Those two things are directly linked. So in the workplace, when we're working with employees that are starting to show signs of low self-control, meaning they might be overly upset when someone says something that's not that big of a deal, they just break down and cry, or they have a big angry outburst, or they slam a door and walk out of the office and slam the door on the way out. One of the first things we'll look at is stress tolerance. Because as you can imagine, if you're stressed out, you're more irritable. Little things upset you, and then suddenly you're getting triggered and your self-control goes out the window. So those are two very closely correlated skills. And so for you, you'll want to kind of know, we all have our own degree of stress tolerance. Each person has their own level of what that is. And that even changes, right? As you, like finals week, stress tolerance is probably fairly low. But the week after, it may go right back up. So it's different for all of us, different times of the year, even different periods in your life, and monitoring that for yourself and then doing something for yourself accordingly. Sometimes it means you got to get up and leave the room before you know you're going to say something you shouldn't say. Sometimes it means you got to leave early and go to the gym and work that off. Whatever it is you got to do for yourself to keep that stress tolerance healthy, that's really the key. This is one thing most companies neglect terribly. There's a big movement right now for wellness, and mostly, I'll just be honest with you, I think most of them are doing it because it lowers their health insurance premiums. I mean, that sounds terrible, but I think that that's a driving motivator behind these companies. There was, I was just talking to one of my colleagues today in London this week. 4 people in the financial services industry jumped out the window and committed suicide. Different companies. So it's all everyone's talking about in Europe right now, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. But it's almost directly related here to EQ and obviously stress tolerance. It's pretty serious, so you gotta really take care of yourself here. Okay, flexibility. This is another big area that companies are looking for today. This is tied also to coachability, because flexibility is how open you are to new ways of doing things, how well you can roll with change. Now, if you're very black and white and you like to know predictable things, beware. The workplace today is topsy-turvy, and in a lot of cases, I sit with employees who got hired to do one job, and a year later, they're doing something very different. And they look at me and they say, this isn't even the job I was supposed to be hired to do. And I say, well, this is your world now. This is your reality. You've got to make a big boy or girl decision here whether you want to take this new job that they have for you or not. Because it's not even the company's fault. I mean, the world is changing so quickly. Industries are changing, competitors are changing, the economy is changing, and so companies have got to be nimble to be successful, and that means they need a workforce that is also nimble, that can roll with the change without shutting down and take on different jobs and responsibilities and different ways of looking at things without rejecting it, without being rigid or stuck in comfort zone. Comfort zone, I was speaking yesterday to another group, and comfort zone is the enemy of emotional intelligence. Let me just say that. Comfort zone is the enemy of emotional intelligence, because as soon as you get into your comfort zone, you start missing what's happening around you. You stop adjusting to your environment and start expecting your environment to adjust to you. It's a risky dynamic that can get out of control, and unfortunately, if you're far enough into your career, it can derail you. Problem solving is another element to EQ, and even though problem solving we think of as maybe a more technical skill or more of an intellectual skill, it's really problem solving when emotions are running high. When the heat is on, can you think your way through a solution that's a good one instead of reacting in haste or emotion? It's also your ability to stop and sort of get a lay of the land and consider options before you just rush into impulsively making a decision. It's also independent decision making. This is what I hear employers say about your generation in the workplace. Nobody wants to work alone. Nobody wants to make a decision by themselves. They want a committee, they want a group, they want to have a group of people all the time working together, because you're socialized in a very group environment. Your social skills generally pretty high that's one thing you have going for you, very high social skill. But the trade-off is sometimes companies want you to be a very independent decision maker. And that might be something that's a little out of comfort zone for you. But again, that's okay. You've got to lead into that discomfort and take some risks and make decisions more independently than you might otherwise if your job requires it or the situation calls for it. Influence skills is another key EQ skill. Influence is really, as you can guess, sort of inspiring, motivating other people, winning them over, finding a solution, a win-win that's good for everybody. What jobs do you think influence would be really important for?
Sales.
Sales. Absolutely. What else?
Management.
Management. You have an all-volunteer army in management. What else?
Politician.
Politician. Very good. What else? Think of any others? Education. What else?
Your job.
My job. Right. My job. In human resources, it might be the person who's doing the recruiting, has to, convince people to come and work for their company. Influence skills are going to be really important in that job. Volunteer work. If you're going to work in a nonprofit or with any type of a volunteer workforce, you got to have strong influence skills, because you can't force anybody to do anything in that environment. So there's a lot of jobs, and all of these 10 are important, of course, but certain jobs are going to require a higher priority on a set of these skills. So that's why I say with your self-awareness, figuring out where you're going to play at your best, where you're going to add the most value in the world and feel the best about the contribution you make every day might be directly correlated then with this influence skill. And and picking roles and jobs that bring out the best in you. Okay? And optimism, this is a belief system that the future will be better than the past. And it's also seeing each problem as an individual occurrence instead of a grand plan against you. I see a correlation here with people who have lower optimism that feel like they have no say in their lives. They have no control over the things that happen to them. I was interviewing a candidate for a client not long ago, and I was asking her a bunch of questions, of course, about her experience and her background. And afterward, I was looking back at my notes, and in every single job she had told me about, in every story she gave me, somebody at that company was setting her up, like sabotaging her. And I thought, that would be probably an example of low optimism, because she was convinced that nothing bad was ever her influence. It was always somebody else trying to get her. So optimism is really key, and there's a great book out called Learned Optimism. If you feel you're not quite as optimistic as you should be, this is actually something you can learn. And Martin Seligman is the author, Learned Optimism. He has a whole Positive Psychology Institute. You can actually go online and take a free optimism test if you're interested. So that might be something to look into, because it's certainly something that's worthwhile. And as I said, not every job's going to need all 10 of these high, but certain jobs will require a combination of these in order to be successful in that role. Okay, any questions on the 10? Yes.
Just a thought.
Yes.
What about accountability? Emotional accountability.
Yes, emotional accountability. Vital, right? And emotional accountability is an outcome of emotional intelligence. Because if I know I've been in a bad mood, and I know I've taken out that bad mood on the people around me who I really shouldn't have, because my self-awareness is up. Even if my self-control is down, my self-awareness is up and I know I've done that, I can then, when I think about it, go back using my ability to respond, self-control, go back to those people the next day and say, I'm sorry, I really didn't handle that meeting very well, and I need to apologize to you for that. And so those with higher EQ typically have higher degrees of accountability. They own their own behavior more readily and more easily. And naturally, with more self-control, it's easier to own it, right? If I'm on good behavior most of the time, it's a lot easier for me to own the bad behavior. If I'm on bad behavior a lot, it might be easier for me to say it's not me, it's the world around me that's setting me up. Stephen Covey, who I'm another big fan of, he wrote a great book. I recommend it to you. It's a business classic now, but it's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in that book, he says, you can't talk your way out of problems you behaved yourself into. And I think it's such a great quote. You cannot talk your way out of problems that you behaved yourself into. And it's true. You can damage your credibility pretty quickly with bad behavior if you don't watch out. And it can take a while for it to turn itself back around perception-wise of other people. Okay, so I wanted to share with you this interesting study. This is a pretty extensive study, in fact. This came out by a firm who did a 3-year study of 312 companies with 5,247 hiring managers, and they watched to see how these hiring managers hired, how well they did at hiring. And take a guess how many employees in the first 18 months failed in the job. These are more than 20,000 employees we're talking about here. Any guess how many failed?
40%.
First 18% wise? 10%? Half? What else?
40.
40? Very good. What else? 25? Yeah. Is that 25?
Yeah.
Sure, okay. Actually, it's like right between the first two. It's 46% failed in the first 18 months. Failure meaning they left the company, they were terminated, or they left on their own under pressure, or they had a negative performance review, or they were written up on a disciplinary action. That's a pretty high number, half roughly. They didn't care so much about how many though, they wanted to know why. The number one reason why, we talked about this, is coachability. Failed because they couldn't accept feedback, 26% of them. Number two reason, 23% unable to understand and manage their emotions. Low self-control. Number three reason, 17% lacked the necessary motivation. Another EQ skill. Number four, had the wrong temperament for the work environment. So low self-awareness, picked a job that starts at 6 in the morning when they're not a morning person. Number five reason, 11% failed because they didn't technically know how to do their job. So technical skills are great, but they're not all there is. And when I talk with HR people, I partner a lot of times with human resources within organizations, and they confirm about 90% of the time somebody's in HR not because they lack the ability to do their job, but because they're not getting along with the team, or nobody wants to work with them, or they're too emotional. A lot of these reasons end up coming up as the reason why people fail in the job. So this is good insurance for you, developing EQ. And as I said earlier, comfort zone is the enemy of EQ, and to me that's what ego is. That's me going into a company and saying, look, this is me, and this is how I work, and this is how I communicate, and this is how I do everything. You people just need to adjust, Get in line with this, because this is how I do it. And high self-awareness might give you that ammunition, but that doesn't excuse it. You can't then give up your self-control and say, okay, all of you have to get in line with this. You have to understand the burden is equally on you to adjust to that environment. So there's this ongoing balance that you have to be aware of between your ego and your EQ. And what can trigger that comfort zone are several things. One is that type A personality. So if any of you know that you have a type A personality, you know what that is? Type A? No? Okay. Intense, focused, goal-oriented, nothing is ever good enough. I'm going to finish college at 22.3 months, and then I'm going to go to grad school, and I'm going to finish that by 24 and a half, and then I shall be married at 28, have my first child at 30, and you've got your whole life perfectly laid out and planned out for yourself. That's a lot of a type A type personality, and in the workplace, it can drive people crazy because everyone has to be on this predetermined random schedule, arbitrary schedule. Workload stress, as I talked about, can certainly trigger that. It's all about me. Image or reputation concerns, so being worried about how you look to your boss can get you in trouble. And or perfectionism, sometimes tied to that type A personality. So how do you develop EQ in yourself? Some great tools available. Now we've gotten to a point where this science has been around long enough. There's a ton of online resources available to you. I'm going to give you a bunch as well at the end. But one is you can take an EQ test. You can actually measure your EQ right now. And that's a great thing to do to baseline where you are. And there's a variety of assessments available. If you just Google EQ assessment or EQ test or emotional intelligence test, you'll find a ton of them. You can do those self-only, as you go online, you take it about yourself, or you can have a 360 done. 360s are a great tool to do, and we recommend leaders in particular take them about once every year and a half. You can also ask for feedback. Have a best friend, have a roommate, have a family member tell you how they see you. And compare that to how you think you are. There's also great formal or informal training programs out there. There's online learning for developing EQ. There's a ton of books. And then maybe you could find a mentor who could also help coach you on some of your EQ traits and what you might want to work on. Mentorship is a big deal right now in corporate America. And then, as I said, self-paced learning, Self-reflection is a really valuable way to raise that exercise we talked about earlier, where you go home and you think about your day and how you handled yourself and who you might need to go chat with and apologize to. Increase face-to-face communication. I can't read your reaction to me if I don't see your face. And this is a big challenge, as you can guess. In companies today, this is a huge challenge because we have global workforce, we have remote employees. Companies are really struggling with how to raise face-to-face. Now, things like FaceTime and Skype are invaluable. And so I think that having knowledge of how to use that technology can really pay off and help increase EQ for everybody. And experience. So one good news about EQ is it automatically goes up all by itself. You will have more EQ at 40 than you have today, even if you do nothing else, because time on the planet teaches you stuff. And so we know EQ does increase almost through osmosis as you mature. Now, how about once you start work? Because as I said, a lot of companies will work hard to onboard you and try and get you oriented to them, but not enough employees onboard themselves back to the company. So there's some tips that you can use to help you. I would say when you first get started, spend at least the first month observing, listening, and not doing a lot of talking. Get to know the lay of the land. Don't do what I did and just go right in there and say, well, this is how you guys must do it, or this is how you should do it, because this is how I do it. That's all ego, no EQ. I would also, social skill again, introduce yourself and build relationships proactively. Don't just sit at your desk and wait for people to come to you. Most people are very busy. If you're lucky, you might get lunch with your boss your first day of work. A lot of employees start, they may have a desk, they probably don't have a computer login, some of them don't have a phone that works. There's not a lot going on the first week of work in a lot of companies. So that's a perfect opportunity for you to get to know your coworkers, get to know the people that work around you, and then make it a habit ongoing that you have relationships with people in other parts of your organization outside of your small work group. And again, don't expect the culture or the other employees to do all the adjusting to you. You're the new kid here, so you really have to kind of own that and be flexible and put the burden on you to adjust instead of expecting the environment to adjust to you. And don't assume that you know everything about a company just because you did a lot of online research. There is always a ton of stuff that goes on culturally inside organizations that don't make the press. And so it is going to take you that first 30 days, in some cases 6 months, before you really figure out who's who around here. How do things really work here? How do decisions really get made? Who are the people in power that may or may not actually have that job? Those are all workplace dynamics that you're going to want to have that situational awareness to that will help you long term. Okay. Okay, so here are some resources that I'm going to leave you with if you're interested. Our website, penumbra.com, has a lot of articles. We have a free monthly newsletter that we send out. If you go to the homepage, you can register for it. And then right below the registration is an orange box that says View the Archive. If you click that box, it'll open up a page for you that has about 6 years of articles. And it has everything in there on how to develop self-awareness, how to have emotional intelligence, how to use your EQ with a boss who has none, just in case you need that at some point. Onboarding yourself is in there. If you want a complete copy of the article, that's in there. So there's a ton of resources there if you're interested. And I'm also on a blog called Shirkani's Musings. So if you Google search Shirkani's Musings, you'll find my blog. and I post articles and experiences and stories and all kinds of stuff there. I also am on Twitter. I'm sure many of you are on Twitter. Please follow me and I'll follow you back. But we do a lot of tweeting about EQ and contacts within articles and other things that are very interesting. So I'll retweet things that I find related to EQ and leadership. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. So once you get your LinkedIn set up, if you don't already, please feel free to connect with me there. And same thing, tons of articles, resources. I follow a lot of the thought leaders around leadership, and I'll repost their articles on my site too, on my LinkedIn page. So again, tons of other free resources for you if you're interested. All right, any final questions? What are you doing? Right on the dot. Great, Q&A time. Okay, question?
You know some ways to help increase problem-solving skills?
So great question. Ways to increase problem-solving skills. Are you thinking about the element of thinking your way when the emotions are running high, or
No.
what angle of it?
You're faced with a particular problem in the workplace, and you might not have the resources to make an informed decision. What kind of thought process would help?
Yeah.
solve the problem?
You know, it's great, I think, sometimes too, to have somebody that you can just brainstorm with, you can say, here are what I think my options are, especially like that mentor type person who knows the environment better, who might have other options for you that you may not even be aware of.
Say you're writing solo on a project.
Okay.
You don't have a mentor.
I would say, you know, certainly internet research to see what other best practices are done out there. There's also a lot of chat room type things where you could post a problem out and get some feedback from others. But I think you always have to consider that the risk-benefit ratio, right? So how risky is this approach versus this approach versus this approach, and how much benefit could we get from each? And I think too, when you go back to your organization, if you have options, I think bosses always appreciate options. You can always say, here's option A, if we go down this, the risk is potentially this, the benefit is this. If we go down option B, risk is this, benefit is this. And then let your boss kind of decide. Let them weigh in on it. But if you come to them and go, I don't really know what to do, I don't know, that's what will annoy them, and that's what will upset them. So you have to really come with some solution, with some odds of success, and then it's okay if you aren't committed to any one of those, especially early on. Does that help? Options are good. Any other questions? Yes?
In terms of the 10 keys for EQ,
Yes.
we talked about self-awareness, and then the last one was optimism.
Yes.
I feel like sometimes those are sort of in conflict. Because I like to think of myself in the workplace as optimistic, I can handle the challenge and everything. But I've definitely found myself a little overwhelmed. You know? So where do you draw the line?
So the optimism piece is your confidence that you'll work through it and be successful anyway. And are you thinking that there's times when you are questioning that?
Right,
So
so
the-
you take that 5, 6 a.m. job.
Yes.
You know you're not a morning person, but you want to be flexible, you want to be optimistic.
Yes.
And you want to, you know, work towards success.
Yes.
I mean, where do you draw the line?
I
as to,
know.
I'm really struggling here, but I need to push through and be optimistic.
Yes, yeah, I know what you're saying. And as I said, discomfort is a good thing, you know, but what you have to have the self-awareness to know is it may not ever get easy. You have to have the reality balance with optimism, because I should probably really clarify that in all of these skills, more is not necessarily better. It's tempting to look at it like that and think, oh, well, the more optimism, the better, right? The more flexibility, the better. The more empathy, the better. But the reality is any of those overused or inappropriately used can become a great weakness on you. I was coaching a senior sales executive one time, and his optimism was so high, and he was like the nicest guy in the whole wide world. Every time he saw me, he had a smile on his face, and he'd be like, oh, everything, I know, how are you? Everything's great. And they had the big insurance company, they had a product recall, huge problems that it created throughout the entire sales organization and certainly the clients. And so his team was together to kind of do like a crisis meeting to figure out how they were gonna explain this to the clients and what they were gonna do about it. And the whole meeting, he was like, it's okay, it's all gonna work out. It's all right, so we're gonna get past this, and it's not gonna be the end of the world. And his credibility took such a hit. I talked to his team afterward, and they were like, we were all sitting there like, what planet is this guy living on? I mean, and it made him just seem so out of touch with the reality of the situation. Now, he's a core optimist, but he had to recognize that in certain situations, you can't be an optimist to have higher emotional intelligence. He didn't have the situational awareness to understand. He had to turn his empathy up and his optimism down in that case. So you have to have the self-awareness to know doing a 6 a.m. job, not being a morning person, may never come easy for you. Knowing that, you have to have the self-discipline to get yourself there anyway. And that's what you have to ask yourself, am I committed to that? Can I do that? Now, if you can fairly easily find a job that's not at 6 a.m., that's not outside of your temperament, again, put yourself in situations that bring out the best in you. It doesn't necessarily mean you failed, as long as you're choosing better choices that you will be more successful in the long run. If it's the only job you got, you might have to just suck it up. But acknowledge that, it's probably never going to be easy for you. So you got to do other things to reward yourself for being good all week and getting there on time. Great question. What else? Yes?
Are there little things that someone can do daily that can help them improve their EQ?
Yes, there are. And if you look at any of the books or articles, our article on our performance pointer newsletter that's called Raising Your Self-Awareness has daily exercises that you can build into your routine. And then there's also a book out called Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and that one has, I think, 100 different exercises that several of them can be done daily as well to increase your overall EQ. So that would be another resource, but yes. And daily is better, honestly. A little bit each day is better than waiting till Friday and just saying, okay, I'm gonna get my week in or my month in. The way the brain works, and a lot of the neuroscience that's being studied, neuroleadership is a field that's being studied right now. A lot of it says small daily doses reinforce new behaviors much better than one big dose spread out. Any other questions? Great questions. Yes?
Do you have a particular book that is your favorite on the topic?
Oh, I love you for that. I do. Guess what? It's my book. Ego. Ego versus EQ is my book. And this basically goes through 8 ego traps, things that trip us up and put us back on ego and reduce our emotional intelligence at certain times, especially if you're a manager or leader of people. So if you're in a role right now where you're leading other people, or you want to get into management, it might be a good reading for you. So this is something, of course, I'm going to recommend. But the Emotional Intelligence 2.0, I think, is a great starting book as well. So I would recommend that. And that one comes with an assessment too, so you get a code and you can go online and get a free EQ test when you buy the book. So that's a nice little bonus. And then there's a lot of articles as well that I recommend on emotional intelligence. And again, just Google search, and there's a ton out there right now. If you can't find exactly what you're looking for, just email me. Thanks for the question. That was a perfect segue.
Jen? Any other questions before Jen leaves us? Okay. Jen, Shirkani, thank you so
My
much.
pleasure.
Wonderful presentation. Excuse me, I didn't cut off the applause. Jen does have some books available for sale outside your door, so those of you who came prepared and are interested in buying books, Jen will sign it for you. So we've got that. So
There you go.
please, thank you.
Thank you.